Magna Carta, Great Charter, perhaps the most important document in all of English history, was signed in 1215. It has become the inspiration for important documents all throughout world history, and along with the parliamentary system that it helped create, inspired revolutions and democratic uprisings throughout much of the Western world, with England, the United States, France, all basing their common law and basic ideas of equality before the law, the equality of all citizens, and that no one is above the law on these principles. It was originally signed by force. King John, one of the worst kings in English history, was compelled by his nobles to sign it in 1215 following a series of defeats. The charter was signed 16 years after he came to the throne following the death of his brother, the great crusader, Richard the Lionheart. Richard had gone on this crusade with Philippe Augustus, Philip II, the King of France, who was determined to bring back French greatness and seize English lands. At this time, the Angevin Empire, created by John's father Henry, was under siege, and John had done precious little to succeed at controlling it, losing territories such as Anjou and Normandy. This abject humiliation on the battlefield, coupled with abject humiliation in front of the church and one of its most aggressive pontiffs, Innocent III, who eventually banned all services and sacraments in England, an interdict because John would not accept his appointees to the Archbishop of Canterbury. John became so unpopular with his spiritually suffering people that he was eventually forced to turn England over to be a vassal of the Pope, with the Pope approving his final decisions, such as his one to go to war with France once more, imploring and basically forcing his nobles to turn over their men-at-arms and their money so he could pair with Otto IV, the Holy Roman Emperor, and the Flemish army to challenge Philip for his lands in France once again. The Battle of the Bovines in 1214 was a humiliating defeat for John and his coalition. He lost almost all of his territories save Aquitaine in the southwestern portion of France, and when he tried to raise money and force his nobles to pay more taxes, they censured him, basically forming a protest and a mutiny where they forced him to sign the Magna Carta in 1215, basically saying the king was not above the law and could not tax indiscriminately. Luckily for John, this challenge to royal authority was squashed by his lord and overseer, the Pope, Innocent III, who blocked the Magna Carta. However, the tradition was instituted that the nobles would now play a part in consenting to the king's wishes. The charter was brought back under John's successor, Henry, who took over a year later, and eventually made permanent by Henry's son, Edward Longshanks, Edward I, the Hammer of the Scots, who, in order to get the permission of his nobles, would often gather them together to talk at certain areas. And since they spoke French, they did not talk so much as they parleyed. This was the beginnings of the English Parliament, rooted in the idea of Magna Carta, that the king was not above the law, the nobles must indeed consent, and that the consent of the governed was the most important way a king would rule his kingdom. This parliamentary tradition, which now dominates not only England but most of Europe, as well as many of England's former colonies, could not have been possible without the Magna Carta creating a system where the king only got his rights from the consent of the governed, a principle that would show up over and over again in world history.